biggest lie ever propagated by the power structure and those who serve them. That it's just condensation trails in our skies. Absolute lie that anyone with a sound and functioning sense of reason can decipher by a constant observation of the skies. You can't have grid patterns one day, nothing the next, unless something is going on. And there was a mountain of data to back up that something is global climate engineering programs launched without public knowledge or consent, an experiment from which there is no return, an experiment which we have all been committed to, again, without our knowledge or consent. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour for October 20th, 2018. It's happening. We are on the fast track to a lifeless planet. Moving on. In the first evidence that we are tipping over the edge potentially towards runaway or irreversible climate change, we're past that point, says James Curran, former chief executive of the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency and co-author of the study published. The news has come as a shock. Previous estimates indicated that peak carbon would not be reached until at least 2030. Instead, the new data reveals that trees and plants are already 10 years beyond peak carbon. In 2014 alone, the shortfall in carbon absorption was equivalent to a year's worth of human-produced emissions from China. That's immense. But next year, the shortfall might be adequate to the emissions of China plus Australia. But what this report is leaving out, it's leaving out part of the reason those trees are not absorbing more carbon is because of climate engineering. Because the toxic elements in the rain are poisoning root systems, causing them to shut down nutrient uptake. The intense UV is shutting the trees' stomata, their respiratory ports, so they can't breathe, they can't absorb carbon. So there is a massive factor left out of this equation that could change the whole equation. And that is climate engineering. It's not being acknowledged, the effects of climate engineering. Yet again, one more massive factor that makes abundantly clear, single greatest threat we face is climate engineering and is virtually disabling the planet's ability to respond to what's happening. Climate engineering is the greatest threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm. Another headline from the UK Independent and other sources. This alarming but not surprising report. UK growers warn of a shortage of onions, potatoes, and other vegetables after extreme weather decimates crops. Onion crops down by half, potatoes down by a third after summer heat wave. And let's keep in mind, climate engineers can and are creating massive heat zones. They can create short-term toxic cool downs at the cost of a worsened warming, but they can actually create massive heat domes. How? Ionosphere heaters. This is all verifiable fact. You have the documentation to back it up. When you heat the ionosphere, you create compressing air that creates a heat dome that causes in the northern hemisphere a clockwise circulation, which is used to steer the jet stream. So they are baking the U.S. West and parts of the European West under heat domes. That's part of this problem. This is weather warfare, all-out weather warfare. So we have massive food shortages or crop failures happening in the UK right now, and it's happening all over the planet. Make no mistake. All over the planet, and it's going to get worse fast. Study shows massive insect loss. From the report, beekeepers in the U.S. and elsewhere stated an increase in honeybee deaths over the last year, possibly a result of erratic weather patterns. What about the aluminum? Search bees aluminum. Again, academia is a joke at this point. They're a joke. They omit the facts to pacify the population. Search bees aluminum. We know aluminum is killing the bees. We know that, giving them symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia. But the report continues. Weather patterns brought on by a changing climate, no mention of climate engineering. Insects around the world are in crisis, according to a growing number of long-term studies showing dramatic declines in invertebrate populations. A new report suggests that the problem is far more widespread than scientists realize. We realized at geoengineeringwatch.org a decade ago. We're to think that the entire climate science community didn't realize? We were publishing there was an 80 to 90% decline in aquatic and terrestrial insects nearly a decade ago. It's taken this long for academia to admit it. And then we go back to what I read a moment ago, that a so-called scientist representing a major organization says that eating insects is going to fix our global food supply. We're living in an asylum. There's no birds, or the bird populations are crashing because there's no insects. Are we to think that if the birds can't survive due to lack of insects, somehow we're going to find enough to support us all? Absurd. We live in an asylum. Now to the rapidly worsening climate engineering caused weather whiplash scenarios in the U.S. Let's start with this report from last week. National Weather Service records earliest snowfall ever in Kansas. Earliest snowfall ever, with some record cold and record snow. Keep following me. How about this headline, which not too many people talked about? Fairbanks, Alaska, breaks a 101-year-old high temperature record. Temperatures that are far above normal. Hasn't frozen in many parts of Alaska still. And we have record cold in Kansas. That's called chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. And astoundingly, even some people in the anti-geoengineering community, or say they are, will use this as some sort of verification that the climate's not warming, which covers the tracks of the climate engineers because the event in question was completely engineered. We have to stand on solid, credible data, and if we're really fighting against climate engineering, we have to look at all the facts. These cooldowns are completely engineered. These weather whiplash scenarios are a result of chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. More on that in a moment. Now, let's consider this is now the normal. Again, snow in Kansas and suntan weather in Alaska. And let's not forget the warm weather in Finland, for example. Here's a headline. Finland breaks October records with temperatures of 70 degrees. The Finnish nighttime temperatures were also at record warmer levels. Why? It's not cooling off at night because the atmosphere is saturating with methane, which is covering the planet like a layer of glass. What happens when our atmosphere is thickened with an extremely powerful heat-trapping gas like, again, methane? Heat gets in, doesn't get out. Planet warms rapidly. What about climate engineering and solar radiation management? Again, short-term cooling in exchange for worsened long-term warming. Temporary toxic cooldowns, large regions, but worse overall warming. If you want to know more about chemical ice nucleation, go to any search engine, search geoengineeringwatch.org, engineering winter. You'll find lots of data. Moving on. Consider that climate and environmental collapse and cataclysm are occurring all over the globe. We are not being told while we're being fed every imaginable form of political theater day in and day out. Here's another headline. This one from the New Yorker.com and other sources.
Come on.
How to write about a vanishing world. Scientists chronicle ecological destruction and must confront the loss of their life's work and our planet's riches. Moving on, I'm running out of time. From truthout.org and other sources, this new headline report. Of course, with no mention of climate engineering, the elephant in the sky. Here's the headline. Earth's ice loss is a nuclear explosion of geologic change. The poles are imploding. I'm not going by anybody's word. We can observe this in satellite imagery. Again, the ramifications are massive. Climate engineering is making the overall situation worse, not better. Another headline, humans causing climate to change. I mentioned this earlier in this broadcast, and I've mentioned it many times before. Humans causing climate to change 170 times faster than natural forces. There is nothing natural about that.